Mishnah and DAF Vav Amud Aleph. Shlosha Gittin Pesulim. Now I want you to keep track of the language of the Mishnah. The Mishnah starts off by saying that there are three types of get that are pasul, but v'im niseis havlad kosher. But if she marries with that kind of pasul get, the child she has from her next husband is still kosher, which indicates that it's not really a pasul get. It's probably only pasul midrabanan, right? So therefore, we're not going to declare the child that she has next a mamzer, but it still was a malformed get for some reason. Now, what are the three categories? Kasav biksav yado ve'enolav edim. The first is that if a man writes a get with his own handwriting, and there's no witnesses on it at all. So the Mishnah is suggesting that really b'di'evet it's a kosher get, but b'derabanan it's not kosher. That's category number one. Now, before we go to 2 and 3, let's just clarify something. We know that there's a long-standing machlokes throughout Maseches Gittin between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer, whether Eidei Ksiva Karti or Eidei Mesira Karti, right? Is the trigger that validates or triggers the get's validity, is it the signatures of the witnesses in the writ, or is it the witnesses who witness the transaction of the get? Rabbi Meir says it's the signatures of the witnesses that are signing the get, and Rabbi Elazar says that it is the witnesses who witness the transfer of the get from the husband to the wife, or from the husband's proxy to the wife. Okay? Now, at face value, you would be tempted to say that this Mishnah must go according to Rabbi Elazar, because according to Rabbi Elazar, you don't need to have witnesses. So therefore, the reason why it's kosher b'di'eved is because there's no witnesses signing on it, but we go like Rabbi Elazar. But that's not going to work. As you'll see in just a minute, Rabbi Elazar argues with everything at the end of this Mishnah. Rabbi Elazar argues with everything that we're saying as far as these three gittin to be pasul. He says they're even kosher lechatchila, as long as you have Eidei Mesira. So this causes Tosfos, and Rashi is a little bit difficult to read because there's some girsa problems in Rashi. So we're going to go like Tosfos read, or at least some people understand Rashi, is that this whole first part of the Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Meir. And even though Rabbi Meir requires witnesses to be in a get, the fact that a husband wrote it with his own handwriting that is corroborated to be the husband's handwriting is even superior to two signatures of witnesses. It's almost like we say Hodas Baldin Kimeya Edim Dami, that the confession of a litigant is stronger than 100 witnesses. So too, when we can verify that the husband himself wrote the get, then that's even stronger than 2 witnesses who were there really to testify that the husband authorized the get. Well, if he wrote it with his own hand, then obviously that's stronger than even 2 witnesses. So that's the way we're going to understand the Mishnah, that this first part goes according to Rabbi Meir, and that one's own handwriting is even, obviates the need for Eidim. But still, midarabanan, you still need to have Eidim, and so therefore, lechatchila, she cannot use this get, but b'di'evet, if she does, her future children are kosher children. That was number one. Number 2 is Kasav Yeshalav Eidim ve'in bozman. There are witnesses who sign the get, but there's no date on the get. Now remember, do you remember why we said that you need a date on a get? We had given several reasons in the Gemara much earlier in Gittin, but one of the reasons that Rashi cites over here is we're worried about predating and post-dating. We're worried that a husband who has, let's say his wife committed adultery, but he's married to his niece and he has Rachmanis, he doesn't want her to face the death penalty. So he may predate a get or not put a date on it at all and testify that it was done at an earlier time, so that it reflects on the fact that when she had her affair, it was done post-divorce when it really wasn't. So that's the reason why we require a date to verify that if anything happened before that date, then she committed adultery. That would be one reason. There are other reasons as well, but that's why the rabbis required absolutely there has to be a date on a get. And category number 3 is Yesh bo zman ve'ein bo ela eid echad. If there is a date written, but there's only one signature of a witness, you don't have 2 witnesses. Now, of course, the question is going to be, you're telling me that all of these three categories are only pasul midirabanan, but midioraisa they're kosher. Why should this be kosher if it only has one signature? That doesn't seem to make any sense. In order for a document to be legal, it has to have two signatures, right? So how can a one-signature document be okay? We're going to get to that shortly. But then the Mishnah says, Harei elu shlosha gittin pesulin. These three types of gittin are pasul midirabanan. V'imnisei savlat kosher. But b'di'evet, if she used the get and she went and remarried and had children, those children are kosher. Now, Rabbi Elazar Omer, now here's where I just told you before that this whole thing does not go like Rabbi Elazar. How do I know that? Because we look at the last part of the Mishnah, and it says that Rabbi Elazar Omer, Afal pi she'ein alav edim ela shenasno la bifnei edim kosher v'gova minachasim mishubadim she'ein ha'edim chosmim al haget el mipnei tikun ha'olam. Rabbi Elazar says, I totally disagree with the whole premise of this Mishnah. You started off by saying in case number 1 that you need to have it written in his own handwriting if there are no witnesses. He says no. Any get that's written without Eidim is perfectly kosher as long as you have Eidei Mesira, as long as you have Eidim that witness the giving over of the get from husband to wife. And not only that, but that's true not only by Gittin, says Rabbi Elazar, it's true by all transactional contracts, even financial contracts. If, let's say, I lend you money and you give me an IOU, that IOU does not have to be signed by witnesses as long as there were witnesses to witness the giving over of the promissory note. Then I can use the promissory notes to collect. And if it's contested, so then I'll get the original witnesses. Why then do the rabbis, midirabanan, still require every shtar to be signed by witnesses? Because if you ever have a get or any other transactional contract contested in a court of law, what happens if those original witnesses no longer are in the same town? What if they've passed away, one or both? That's why you need to have their signatures, so that at least you have a better chance of corroborating the signatures by people who recognize their signatures and getting the actual witnesses themselves. But according to Rebbe Lazar, not only is this get kosher b'di'evid post facto, but even lechatchila, go ahead and use it. If you wrote it without witnesses, go ahead and use it. Tikkun ha'olam requires you to have it, but b'di'evid, if you didn't, so then it's still kosher. The Gemara now says v'suleka. So now our question is like this. Our Mishnah made a point of saying twice that these are three cases where the get is pasul, but the vlad is still kosher. So these are the only three cases. V'ha'ika get yashan. What about the old get? That was the term that the Gemara used, which is any get that's written and the husband puts it in a drawer, then lives with his wife, and then gives it to her after the fact. If he's had yichud with his wife after the get was written, the rabbis required you to write a new get. There too, the Mishnah had said that the get is pasul. Why isn't it on this list over here? The Gemara answers, Hasam lo seitze hacha teitze. The difference is, our Mishnah is talking about categories where not only is the get pasul midirabanan, but she even has to leave her second husband. Right? Now, in the case of get yashan, it's true that the get is pasul, but she doesn't have to leave her second husband if she remarries. But the Gemara says, Hanicha laman da'amar hacha teitze. The Gemara says that'll only work out. We're going to see when we turn the page that there's this whole machlokas brought down as to whether b'di'evid does she have to leave her second husband or not. So you've just told me that over here she has to leave her second husband, but there's a machlokas. We're going to see many opinions that say that here too she doesn't have to leave her second husband. So then we're back to the same question. Why isn't get yashan mentioned here also? The Gemara answers, Hasam tinase lechatchila hachadi evid. The Gemara answers, no, there's still a difference. By a get yashan, if you gave your wife the get yashan b'di'evid, we give her permission to remarry even lechatchila. But over here, by the malformed get, because it was written without witnesses and so forth, we don't give you permission lechatchila to remarry. Now the Gemara's next question, v'ha'ika get kereach. What about the bald get? Who remembers the bald get? Bald get?
Someone didn't sign.
It was a get mikushar. It was a stitched get written for a kohen, done very slowly. We required the witnesses to sign each line on the back of the paper, right? And if one line does not have a signature, the rabbi said that get is invalid. So why isn't that part of this list over here also? The Gemara answers, Hasam havlad mamzer, hacha havlad kasher. The Gemara says, because there the rabbis declared the offspring to be a mamzer. Over here, the rabbi said the vlad is still kosher if she uses that get and has a child. But wait a minute, Hanicha Rabbi Meir, the Amar kol hamishana mi matbeya shetavu chachamim begitten havlad mamzer, elo l'rabbanan ma'ika l'meimar. But the Gemara says, now wait a minute, that was only according to Rabbi Meir, that when you made a bald get, the halacha is that if she remarries and has a child, that child is declared a mamzer only according to Rabbi Meir. Because Rabbi Meir says that the Chachamim have the power to totally invalidate a get and to declare the child to be a mamzer if you deviate from their instructions. So that would make sense why there's a difference. But what if you hold like the Chachamim, that if a get is only pasal midirabanan, then the Chachamim do not have the power to totally invalidate the get and to declare your future child a mamzer? Again, we're back to the same question. What's the difference? But why isn't that case not added to our Mishnah according to the Chachamim? The Gemara answer is Hasam Teitze Hachalo Teitze. So the difference is because in that case, by the bald get, she has to leave her second husband, but here she doesn't have to leave her second husband. Just the opposite of what we said a moment ago. But the Gemara says Hanicha Lamanda Amar Hachalo Teitze, Elo Lamanda Amar Hachateitze Ma'ika Lameimar. But as we'll know, there's a machlokes we're going to see in a few minutes as to whether in these three instances of a pasal get does she have to leave her second husband or not. There's an opinion that says that she does have to leave her second husband. So what's the difference between a bald get and over here? Why is it not in the list? The Gemara answer is b'mekushar le'kamairi. So the answer is because a get mekushar is a specialized kind of get. It's different from all other kinds of gittin. And our Tana was only saying those three standard gittin which are puzzle. He wasn't addressing the special case of get mekushar. So that's why. Next, v'ha'ika shalom malchus. But there was another kind of get that the rabbi said is puzzle, midirabanan. That's not in this list. What was that? Called shalom malchus. Remember when we said that you put a date in the get, but it's the date of the wrong kingdom. You live in Bavel and you put in the Roman date, or you put in the date since the Churban and so forth. The rabbi said that that's a pasal get midirabanan. Why is that not included in our Mishnah? Hasam teitze hachalo teitze. Same answer. In the case of the malformed date, she has to leave her second husband. Here we don't require her to leave her second husband. But wait a minute. Anich laman damar hachalo teitze. El laman damar teitze ma'ika lameimar. That only works out if you hold that in these three cases she doesn't have to leave her second husband b'di'evid. But what if you hold like the Mandamar says that she does have to leave? How is it any different from the Shalom Malchus case? Skip the parentheses. Mukim la kidder Rebbe Meir. V'hasam havlad mamzer, hacha havlad kasher. So the answer is that our Tana holds like Rebbe Meir, who would say on that case of the wrong date in the get, where you use the wrong government, that the child is a mamzer if she gets remarried. And here the rabbis, even according to Rebbe Meir, would not declare the child to be a mamzer. So now the Gemara says, okay, fine. Minyana dereisha l'mu'utei mai, minyana deseifa l'mu'utei mai. Now, if you recall, our Mishnah had said both at the beginning, there are three kinds of gittin which are puzzle, but b'di'evid the child is not a mamzer. And then it said at the end, these are the three cases. Why did it have to say there are three cases twice, once at the beginning and once at the end? So minyana dereisha l'mu'utei hani da'amran. The first time it says that there are three cases is to exclude all of the cases that we just brought that I might have thought should be added into this category. The case of the get yashan, the case of the bald get, the case of the shalom malchus get, and so forth. That's the reason why you have three. It's to tell you that those other get in the halacha is going to be slightly different. But minyana deseifa l'mu'utei hadetanya. And the second time it says three in our Mishnah is to exclude the following brisa that says Hamevi get mi medinas hayam nas nola velo amar b'fanai nichtav v'fanai nechtam yotzi v'havlad mamzer diver Rebbe Meir. That in that case, if a shaliach brings a get from a faraway place to a woman in Eretz Yisrael, and he neglects to say the necessary formula of b'fanai nichtav v'fanai nechtam, that the get was written and signed in my presence, the get is puzzle, and according to Rebbe Meir, the child is a mamzer. Even though this is only a rabbinic requirement, once again, Rebbe Meir says the Chachamim have the power to totally invalidate a get and to declare the future child to be a mamzer. And so clearly that disagrees with our Mishnah. And that's what the Tana wants to point out. The Chachamim Omrimein Avlad Mamzer Kate said Yasa Yitlenu Heimen of the Yachzer V'Yitnenu Lo B'Fnei Shnayim V'Yomer B'Fanei Nichta B'Fanei Nechta. And even if you're going to go like the Chachamim over there, the Chachamim over there say that the child is not a Mamzer, but you still have to take the get from her and give it back to her as the Shaliach and say B'Fanei Nichta B'Fanei Nechta. So therefore, whether you learn like Rabbi Meir that the future child is a Mamzer, or whether you learn like the Chachamim that the future child is not a mamzer, but even according to the Chachamim that the future child is not a mamzer, there's still a remedy over there of not having, you don't have to totally redo the get. Here you have to redo the get if you want to make it, if you want her to be totally divorced midirabanan. But over there you don't have to redo the get, and that's why both according to Reb Meir and according to the Rabbanan, this case is not included in our Mishnah, and that's what the number 3 is offered in for the second time in our Mishnah. Yes?
So we're saying Rabbi Meir says it's a mamzer because anyone who goes against the Rabbanim decree, the child, resulting child, it would be a mamzer.
That the Chachamim have the power to invalidate a get at their discretion, and therefore
decide which one's the mamzer.
To declare the child a mamzer. You see, that's the way. The reason I'm phrasing it that way is because over here this is also pasal midrabanan, and yet the Chachamim do not deem the child.
That was
to
my
be
question.
Okay. Right. Okay. Now. Kosav bichsav yado ve'eno lavedim. Now let's go to the next part of the Mishnah. This case number 1 was if the man writes the get with his own handwriting and there are no witnesses upon it. Case number 2 was there's no date, and case number 3 is there's only one witness. Okay, Amar Rav ksav yado shaninu. So Rav says we are in our Mishnah. Make sure that you understand that the man wrote it with his own handwriting. So the Gemara now says, Ahaya. What is Rav referring to? In other words, which case did he make his statement upon? Ilema Aresha, if you're going to tell me he was referring to case number 1, Pshita, Ksav Yado Kitani. What is he telling me? It says explicitly in the Mishnah. The husband, case number 1 is the husband wrote the get with his own handwriting. So what was Rav adding by saying, make sure you understand that it was done with his own handwriting? That's exactly what the Mishnah said. So ve'ela amitziyasa hareyesha lavedim. So was it going in case number 2 where there's no date on it? So what difference does it make if it was done with his handwriting or not? Even if it was done without his handwriting, there are 2 kosher witnesses signing the get. So that doesn't make any sense. So ela aseifa. Yesh bozman ve'in bo ela eidecha. So Rav's statement is going on case number 3, where we said that there is a date, but there's only one witness. So on that, Rav said, "V'davka ksav yado ve'ed, abol ksav sofer ve'ed lo," and that's what Rav wanted to point out. He says that the only time that this case number 3 will be kosher with one witness is because the husband also wrote the get with his own handwriting. And then one witness signed it, so therefore the get is kosher. But if the husband would not have written it with his own handwriting, then with just one witness, the get would be pasul even midioraisa. Now this should lead you to ask a natural question. If case number 1 was written with his own handwriting, and there's no witnesses at all, and it's kosher, then why do you need case number 3 to tell me that when there's only one witness, it's kosher? So Rashi addresses this. Rashi says there's a chiddush both in case number 1 and in case number 3. The chiddush of case number 1 is that even though no one has signed it, but it's done with his handwriting, it's tantamount to 2 witnesses, at least b'di'evid, and it's kosher. Case number 3, the chiddush is that even though it's written with his own handwriting and one witness has signed it, don't think that now lechatchila you could go ahead and use it. It's still pasul midirabanan, even though one witness has signed it, and even though it's written with his handwriting. And that's the chiddush of case number 3. So really, case number 1 and case number 3 address the same issue, but they're offering 2 different chidushim. Now, Ushmuel Omar, afilu ksav sofer ve'ed. Now, Shmuel will argue, Shmuel disagrees with Rav, and Shmuel says, no, in case number 3, even if a sofer wrote the get and one witness signed it, that is sufficient. At least b'di'evid midioraisa it's sufficient. Now, why is that? Shmuel is apparently of the opinion that the sofer writing the get no sofer is going to write a get unless he received instructions from the husband. And therefore, Shmuel says the very fact that you can identify the sofer who wrote the get is in itself a type of signature of a witness. So therefore, the sofer's handwriting plus the one witness's signature, at least midioraisa makes the get kosher, but midirabanan, it's puzzle. And Shmuel says, you know how I know this? Because Shaharei Shaninu Ksav Sofer ve'ed kosher. Because we learned, as we're going to see it later on in this parak, in the next couple of Mishnayos, the Mishnah says that if you have the writing of the sofer and one witness, that's enough to make it kosher. That makes the get totally kosher. V'Rav midami hasam tinase lechatchila hachadievid. And Rav says, what are you talking about? That's not what the Mishnah over there is saying, because over there the Mishnah says that not only is the get not pasal midioraisa, it's even kosher midirabanan, so lechatchila you could use such a get. So how could you compare that to what we're talking about over here, where we're at least saying that midirabanan it's pasal? So you have to say that over there, Rav is of the opinion that when you say over there that the sofer wrote the get and one witness signed it, it really means that chasam sofer shaninu, that really not only did the sofer write the get, but he also was one of the signatories as one of the witnesses. And that's why it's kosher. But if the sofer didn't sign it, it's not kosher at all. But Shmuel disagrees, and he says, Ushmuel lo kasha ha-besafra de muvak v'ha-besafra de lo muvak. Shmuel says no. I hold that ksav sofer shaninu. I hold that no, the sofer only wrote the get. And really, midirabanan it's puzzle when you're dealing with a sofer who's not a professional. When a sofer is a non-professional, so then we'll only say that it's kosher midiraisa, but it's puzzle midirabanan. But when a sofer is a professional sofer, then his reputation is at stake, and there's even more of a reason to validate his writing of the shtar, that we know for sure that as a professional sofer, he would never write a get unless he verified that the husband wanted it to be written. And based on that, that's why the Mishnah later on will say that even lechatchila it's kosher to use such a get, as long as you get one other witness to sign it. If you got a professional sofer and one signature, it's the same thing as two witnesses, even lechatchila. But over here we're dealing with a non-professional sofer, a guy who does it only on weekends or whatever, and therefore, right, and therefore, it's really technically midiorais it's kosher, but midirabanan we still say it's possible, and that's the difference according to Shmuel. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan, by the way, said the same thing as Rav, that ksav yado shaninu, that the husband wrote the get with his own handwriting, and so Amar le Rabbi Lazar harei shel avedim. So Rabbi Lazar said, thinking that he was going on case number 2, why do you need to have the husband's handwriting? You have 2 witnesses, you just don't have the date. So Amar le aseifa. So Rabbi Yochanan clarified, I was referring to case number 3. I hold that in order for case number 3 to be b'diavad kosher at least midioraisa, even though it's pasal midirabanan, it has to have one witness plus the husband's handwriting. So Zimnan Amar Rav Teitze, Zimnan Amar Rav Lo Teitze. So now the Gemara goes on to the whole issue that we started with the discussion on Amud Aleph, which is on all of these 3 categories where we said that the get midirabanan is possible, even though midioraisa it's kosher. Rav had, and the Mishnah had said that the vlad is still kosher b'diavad. What about her marital status to the second husband? Can she stay married to him or not? So sometimes Rav said that she cannot remain married to him. She has to leave him until she gets a kosher get from the first husband. And sometimes Rav said she could remain married to him. So how do we reconcile it? Yesh labanim lo teitze. Ein labanim teitze. The way to reconcile it is, if she has children from the second husband already, we're not going to require her to leave him. Why? Because by requiring her to leave him, it's going to cast aspersions on the status of the children. But if she hasn't yet had children from the second husband, we tell her, leave your second husband, get a proper get from the first husband, and then you can go and remarry your second husband. Masiv Marzutra Bartuvia, V'kulan shahayu bahen safek kiddushin o safek gerishin, harei elu cholsos v'lo misyabamos. So Marzutra Bartuvia challenges the whole din with the following brisa. We know in Maseches Yevamos, we reviewed it recently, that if a man is married to an erva of his brother, if Shimon, let's say, is married to his brother Reuven's daughter, Shimon married his niece, plus he has a second wife. So we know that if Shimon dies, neither Reuven's daughter nor the co-wife fall to Yibum to Reuven. That because an erva not only herself does not fall for Yibum, but exempts her co-wife, her tzara, from falling to Yibum as well. What happens, however, if the daughter of Reuven is Safek married to Shimon, Safek not married to Shimon? Either because it's a Safek whether he presented her with kosher kiddushin, or it's a Safek whether he presented her with a kosher get or not. In that situation, so the tzara would have to get chalitza even though she can't do yibum. So Ketzad, Safek Kiddushin. What's a case of Safek Kiddushin? So Zorak lo Kiddushin, Safek Korov lo, Safek Korov lo, Zehu Safek Kiddushin. So a Safek on Kiddushin would be, let's say Shimon throws a ring to his niece for Kiddushin, and it's a Safek whether it landed closer to her or closer to him. So it's a Safek whether she was Mikudeshes or not. So if Shimon dies 5 minutes later, then it's a Safek whether the tzara falls to Yibum or not, and therefore she has to get Chalitza, but she can't do Yibum. Now Safek Gerishin, what's an example of Safek Gerishin? So you might have thought that we should talk about a case of he throws a get, and no, that's not the case. The Safek Gerishin is Kosav Biksav Yado Ve'en Alav Eidim. It presents the three cases of our Mishnah. Either the husband gave her a get with his own handwriting without witnesses, or yesh alav edim ve'ein bozman, or if it has witnesses but it has no date, or yesh bozman ve'ein bo ela eid echad, or if it has a date but it only has one witness. In all three cases, Raizel safek gerushin. That's a question as to whether the niece was ever properly divorced. It's a puzzle a get, but was she divorced or not? And as a result, if Shimon then dies after having given her the get, the tzara will have to get chalitza. Now, the amart lo teitze. My question to you is like this: if you're telling me that after giving the woman such a get, if she remarries, she doesn't have to leave the second husband, so tzarasa ase liyavume. So isn't that going to be misleading? Because if we let her stay married to the second husband, isn't that going to cause the tzara to conclude that my co-wife really was completely divorced from my husband, and therefore I totally fall for Yibum, and it's going to cause her to do Yibum with the Yavam, when in reality she's not allowed to do Yibum. So aren't you causing something bad to happen by allowing her to stay married to the second husband? So the Gemara says no, because Tisyabim ve'in bekach klum, chashasha derabbanani. The Gemara says, what's the big issue? In reality, such a get midiaraisa works. Such a get that was written with his handwriting, for example, is a kosher get midiaraisa. So what's the worst that's going to happen if we allow her to stay? If we allow this woman to stay married to her second husband, the tzara is going to interpret that as saying that she's totally falls for yibum. Midiaraisa, she does totally fall for yibum because she doesn't have a co-wife who's an erva anymore. Well, if that's the case, the worst that would happen is that she'll do yibum. No, so what? Midiaraisa, she does fall for yibum. So therefore, there's nothing wrong. You don't have to be concerned about that. Levi Amar la'olam lo teitze, v'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan la'olam lo teitze. So both Levi and Rabbi Yochanan hold that if she married a second husband, and then we discover that she used this faulty get, she doesn't have to leave the second husband. V'chein Amar lu Rabbi Yochanan livnei Rabbi Chalafta de Minhuna. And Rabbi Yochanan said to the children of Rabbi Chalafta, he said to them, Hachi Amar Avuchon, your father said la'olam lo teitze, that she doesn't have to leave the second husband. And then your father also said another halacha, which is totally unrelated. He said, "V'karatzes shebe amir eina poseles b'mechatas," that a certain kind of insect that hangs around the sheaves of wheat after the harvest, if it drinks the water from the paraduma, it does not render the water invalid. Now let me just give you the background. In this halacha, if an animal drinks water from the para aduma water, it invalidates the water. And the reason is because there's, what do they call it? Backwash? Is that what it's called? When you drink something and there's backwash? So when the animal backwashes into the drink from what it took, that causes the water to become invalid. It's water that has been combined with the saliva and it's been in the animal's mouth, so it invalidates the water. But this insect only sucks in the water, but it doesn't let any backwash get back in. And therefore, that insect does not invalidate the water of the paraduma. So the Gemara now says, my karotzis, what kind of insect is a karotzis? Amar Abaye Deit Visa de Bene Kipi. It's a certain kind of fly that hangs around the sheaves of wheat. So Masiv Rav Daniel bar Rav Katina, Kol ha'ofos poslim b'meichatas chutz min hayonim mipnei shemot tzetzes. So Rav Daniel asked from the following brisa. It says that all birds invalidate the para aduma water if they drink from the para aduma water, except for the dove, because the dove just sucks up the water without spitting any back in. So his question is, V'im isa nisni chutz miyona v'karatzis. According to you, Rav Chalafta, it should have said in the brisa that both the dove and this kind of fly out in the farm also does not invalidate. Why didn't it include the karatzis as well? So the Gemara answers, Lo psika le de gadola lo pasla katana pasla. The answer is because it depends. The fly that we're talking about, sometimes when it depends on its size. When it's a large fly of that species, so then it does not invalidate the water. But the small fly does have backwash and does invalidate the water. The adkama, so what's the difference in size? How do you tell which fly it is? Rabbi Yirmiyah v'tema Rabbi Ami ad kazayas. Now we're talking about a very, very big insect. If it's smaller than a kazayas, it does invalidate the paraduma water. If it's larger than a kazayas, which is pretty big, that's not just your regular household fly. That is a really big fly. So in that case, it does not invalidate the paraduma water. Okay, let's go on. Rabbi
What has to do with the price of tea in China? I mean, how did this second?
Because Rabbi Yochanan was speaking to Rabbi Chalafta's children, and he said that your father taught me two halachas. And the first halacha had to do with our case, that if b'di'evet she remarries, she doesn't have to leave her second husband. But he told me another halacha. And so for the sake of quoting the story correctly, the Gemara brought in the other halacha. Okay? Now, Rabbi Lazar Omer Afal Pi V'chulei. Rabbi Lazar says at the end of our Mishnah that no, these are not rabbinically puzzle gittin. I mean, if a man writes a get with his own handwriting, he doesn't need witnesses. And even if it's written by a sofer, you don't need two witnesses, because as long as you have witnesses that witness the transferal, it's perfectly kosher, because Edim Asira Karti. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Halacha Rabbi Lazar begittin. We paskin like Rabbi Lazar that Edim are not essential to the get. Ki amrisa kamei di Shmuel Amar af bishtaros. And Shmuel said, not only is this true by gittin, but it's true by all transactional documents, like financial documents. V'Rav savar bishtaros lo. And Rav says that what? That we only paskin like Rebbe Lazar by gittin, but not by other documents. But haketani v'gova minachasim mishubadim. But didn't our Mishnah say that Rebbe Lazar paskins that you don't need witnesses to sign, both for gittin and for transactional documents? So how can Rav disagree? The Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar tarte Omar v'Rav savar kavase b'chadu poligale b'chada. Very simple. Rabbi Elazar paskins by all shtaros, it's Eidei Mesira who are essential, not the signatories. But Rav only holds that way by gittin. He agrees with Rebbe Lazar, but by all other transactional documents he disagrees and holds that they have to have signatures. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi halacha Rebbe Lazar begittin. And these rabbis say also that when it comes to gittin, we paskin like Rebbe Lazar that signatories are not essential. V'Rebbi Yanai Amar afilu reach haget ein bo. But Rabbi Yanai totally disagrees. He says no. Not only do we not paskin like Rebbe Lazar, but if you don't have signatures in a get, then there's not even the fragrance of a get. You don't even, in other words, you're not even going to passel her for the kahuna, because the get is totally invalid. So for Rabbi Yanai, Lesley, the Rebbe Lazar. So now the Gemara says, but you're telling me now that Rabbi Yanai doesn't hold of Rebbe Lazar after this whole group of rabbis paskin like Rebbe Lazar? So the Gemara says, no. Hachi kamer l'rabbanan afilu reach haget ein bo. All Rabbi Yanai was saying, not that he's disagreeing with all of his colleagues. He also paskins like Rebbe Lazar, but his observation was that if you argue with Rebbe Lazar, the Tana who argues with Rebbe Lazar holds that it's a totally invalid get. But as far as how we paskin, that he wasn't addressing. V'chein amar Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina amar Reish Lakish halacha k'Rabbi Elazar b'Gittin. These rabbis also said we paskin like Rabbi Elazar, but for Gittin. And Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu reich haget ein bo. And Rabbi Yochanan says no, that it doesn't even have the fragrance of a get because it has no signatories. But lema Rabbi Yochanan Leslie the Rabbi Elazar. Does that mean that Rabbi Yochanan does not paskin like Rabbi Elazar? No. Hachi kamar l'Rabbanan afilu reich haget ein bo. No, he means to say that those who dispute Rabbi Elazar would hold that it doesn't even have the fragrance of a get, it's meaningless. Shalach le Rabbi Abba bar Zavda l'Mori bar Mar, v'imine me Rav Huna halacha k'Rabbi Elazar b'Gittin o ein halacha. He said, do me a favor, Mori bar Mar, ask Rav Huna who we paskin like. Do we paskin like Rabbi Elazar that signatories are non-essential? So adahachi nach nafshe de Rav Huna. In the meantime, before he had a chance to ask him the question, Rav Huna passed away. So Amar le Rabba berei hachi Amar Abba mishmei de Rava or mishmei de Rabba halacha k'Rabbi Elazar b'Gittin. That so Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, testified that my father Rav Huna said that we do paskin like Rabbi Elazar, that signatories are non-essential. And furthermore, the rabbis who are well versed in the halachas in Jewish law, in the name of Rabbeinu. Anytime you find Rabbeinu voiced by Amoraim, it refers to Rav, who was the chief of the Amoraim. Right? He also said the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar in the laws of Gittin. Damar Rav Chama bar Guria Amar Rav halacha Rabbi Elazar begittin. As Rav Chama bar Guria quoted Rav, that we paskin like Rabbi Elazar. Now Ika da Amri, others learned that the statement was v'chavereinu habikiyim b'dvar halacha v'talmine Rabbeinu mishum Rabbeinu Amru halacha Rabbi Elazar begittin. That it wasn't just one statement of our great colleagues who are quoting Rav say that we paskin like Rabbi Elazar, but it was two separate statements that our colleagues who are very clear in Dvar Halacha and those who quote Rav paskin that we paskin like Rabbi Elazar. The Amar Rav Chisda Amar Rav Chama bar Guria Amar Rav halacha Rabbi Elazar begittin. V'chein ki asa Rabin Amar Rabbi Elazar Amar Rav halacha Rabbi Elazar begittin. But there were two separate statements. One was done by Rav Chisda in the name of Rav Chama bar Guria, quoting Rav. These are the Rabboseinu that are bekiyin b'halacha. They paskin the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar. And Rabin, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, who was a direct student of Rav, also paskins the halachas like Rabbi Elazar. But the bottom line is that you see a whole litany of Amoraim who paskin like Rabbi Elazar, who say that the signatures are non-essential. Next, Mishnah. Shnaim shesholchu shnei gittin shavim. Two people commission the writing of a get on the same day, and by an eerie coincidence, both men's names are Avraham, and both their wives' names are Sarah. And they commission the same sofer, and the sofer is a bit of a shlemiel, and now he's got two gittin that are exactly identical, and he forgets which one he wrote for which couple. So the get has to be written lishma, right? So what is there to do? So v'nisarvu, if they get mixed up, no saying shneim lazu. You should give both gittin to each wife, and that way you cover your bases. Lefichach avad echad mehen harei hasheni batel. And therefore, if one of those gittin gets destroyed or lost, so then you're up a creek. You got to write both of them again because you don't know which one to give to which woman. Now, chamisha shekasvu klal b'sochaget ish ploni megarish plonis uploni plonis v'ha'ida milamato kulan kisherim v'yenosin lekol echas ve'echas. The Mishnah now says, let's say there are 5 men, and they decide to economize on the get. So they all come to the basin at the same time, and they say, listen, Sofer, put it all in one get. Avram divorces Sarah, Yitzchak divorces Rivke, Yaakov divorces Rachel, and so forth. So the Sofer puts it in. He says, so the Mishnah says, if they're all in the same grouping in the text of the get, so then it's perfectly fine. Just take the get, give it to each woman, take it back from her, give it to the next woman, and then all of them will be divorced. But hayakosev tofes lechol echad ve'echad v'ha'idem milamata es sheha'idem nikro in the imo kasher. But if you divided the text into 5 different, let's say, paragraphs, which the Gemara has to define what that means, so then only, and the Edom sign on the bottom, so then only the last paragraph is a valid get. Because if the Edom only signed on the bottom, we don't know if they're signing for all 5 paragraphs are only for the final paragraph. So if the last paragraph just says Yaakov divorces Rachel, so only Yaakov can use it to divorce Rachel, but Avram can't use it to divorce Sarah because it's too disconnected from the witnesses' signatures. Now, the Gemara is now going to say, first of all, Mantana, who is the author of our Mishnah? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Deloka Rabbi Elazar. Our initial thinking is that this Mishnah cannot go like Rabbi Lazar, who says that Eidei Mesira Karti. Why? Because the Rabbi Lazar, Kevin de Amar Eidei Mesira Karti, Halo Yadi Beheminayu Kamigarsha. So the way Rashi understands it is like this. Look, we know from the Psukim that a get has to be done lishma. Now, if you hold that Eidei Kesiva Karti, that like Reb Meir says that you have to have signatories in the get, it's the signatories themselves who have to write the get and sign the get lishma. That makes perfectly good sense. But what if you hold like Rebbe Lazar, who says that you don't need signatories in the get? So what then has to be lishma? So the Gemara's assumption is the mesira has to be lishma. The transferal of the get has to be done with intent and knowledge. Now, if we're talking in the first case of our Mishnah, where the two GITTEN got mixed in, we don't know which one was written for which couple, and the witnesses are witnessing the transferal of two GITTEN to each woman, then it's not, the Eidim are not witnessing lishma. They don't know which get is the active get. They can't determine which one of these two documents is the correct operative document for this for either woman. So how can they be doing it lishma? How can they be witnessing the Mesira Lishma when it's not being done Lishma? So therefore, the Mishnah that says it works obviously can't go like Rebbe Lazar. But the Gemara disputes that. The Gemara says, Abaya Omar Afilu Tamer Rebbe Lazar, Ema Debai Rebbe Lazar, Ksiva Lishma, Nesina Lishma Mi Boy. The Gemara says, no. I grant you that everyone holds that the get has to be done Lishma. You assumed that according to Rebbe Lazar, the Mesira has to be done Lishma. But that's not necessarily true. Because maybe when Rabbi Lazar holds that it has to be lishma, he holds that the sofer has to write it lishma. So the sofer taka, at the time when he wrote each get, he wrote it for Avraham Aleph and for Sarah Aleph, and he wrote the second get for Avram Beis and Sarah Beis, and then he got them mixed up because he's a shlemiel and he mixed the two together. But at least he wrote them lishma, and that for Rabbi Lazar would be sufficient. So maybe our Mishnah could go according to Rabbi Lazar as well, and as long as you give both gittin to each woman, it would be an acceptable delivery. Now, chamish, and we'll finish off with this. Chamish shekasvu klal chulei. You have 5 guys who want to economize in the get, so they all put their divorce instructions in the same piece of paper. So heichi dami klal, heichi dami tofes. So we said like this: if they put it all in one paragraph and the witness is signed on the bottom, so it'll work for all 5. But if they separate it up into 5 different groupings, 5 different paragraphs, and the witnesses sign on the bottom, so it'll only work for the last paragraph. So what's the definition of 1 paragraph versus 5 paragraphs? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan Zman Echad L'Kulan Zehu Klal Zman L'Chol Echad Ve'Echad Zehu Tofes. So Rabbi Yochanan says it depends. If there's one date written on top of the get, and then you talk about Avram divorcing Sarah, Yitzchak divorcing Rivke, Yaakov divorcing Rachel, etc., and then the witnesses sign at the bottom, so then it works for all 5 of them. But if each person has a separate date, that I, Avraham, divorced Sarah on such and such a date, I, Yitzchak, divorced Rivka on such and such a date, etc., so then that's considered separate paragraphs, and it's invalid. It's only valid for the last one. The Reish Lakish Amar Afilu Zman Echad L'Kulam Nami Habi Tofes. And Reish Lakish disagrees. He says that even if you only have one date in the get, it still is going to be considered to be separate groupings, separate paragraphs. Elahechi dami klal, dekos of anu ploni uploni, gerashnu neshosenu plonis uplonis. That you have to write it as follows: we men, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef, Ephraim, we hereby divorce our wives, whose names are Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Dina, Osnas, or whatever, right? We hereby divorce ours. If you put all the men in one group, in other words, if you say we men and you would itemize them, divorce our wives respectively, and you write their names, that's considered to be one paragraph. But if you write Avram is divorcing Sarah, Yitzchak is divorcing Rivka, Yaakov is divorcing Rachel, so that's considered to be separate groupings, and therefore it'll only work for the last on the list because that's who the Eidim are signing on. We're going to challenge that tomorrow, but that's where we're up to.